evening, and welcome to Sleepy Story Facts, where tonight's sleep story, bedtime story, and gentle bedtime journey carries you slowly outward through the dark, silken ocean of space, toward the soft golden lantern of Saturn, a world so beautiful and so calm that even from far away, it seems less like a planet and more like a peaceful thought floating in the night. And as you settle into stillness now, allowing your breathing to lengthen and your shoulders to loosen, you may imagine that you are resting in a quiet vessel with dim lights and warm blankets, moving so gently that you barely notice motion at all, only the sense of gliding deeper into a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep, meant to quiet the noise of the day, and meant to carry you toward deep sleep on a tide of calm narration and sleepy wonder, while ahead of you Saturn waits with its immense rings, its delicate gaps, and its countless tiny moons, each one turning in patience through the dark. And before we arrive, there is nothing to do, nowhere to rush, nothing to solve, only this slow nighttime story and the gentle rhythm of your own breath, in and out, easy and unforced, as if the universe itself were breathing beside you. And with each breath, you may feel a little heavier where your body rests, and a little lighter in the mind, because this is a place for drifting, a place for releasing, a place for listening, as science becomes soft and distant and beautifully serene. And so we begin with the simple truth that Saturn is the sixth planet from the Sun, far beyond the warmth of Earth, orbiting at an average distance of about 1.4 billion kilometers, where sunlight is weaker, the days are strange, and the sky around this gas giant opens into majestic stillness. And yet, for all its scale, Saturn has an elegance that seems almost impossible, because its famous rings, though spanning hundreds of thousands of kilometers across, are astonishingly thin compared with their width, like a great luminous whisper spread across the dark, made not of one solid band, but of countless particles of water ice mixed with rocky dust, pieces as small as grains and as large as houses, all circling together in orderly silence, each fragment obeying gravity with perfect patience, each one part of the calm architecture that has made Saturn the dreamlike jewel of the solar system. And as your own thoughts begin to slow, you may picture those rings not as hard edges or harsh lines, but as gentle paths of silver frost, layered and luminous, so wide that they could swallow the distance between worlds, yet so delicate that in places they seem almost transparent, because the rings are divided into broad regions and subtle bands. And among the most famous is the Cassini division, a dark gap between the A ring and B ring, not entirely empty, but quieter in appearance, shaped by orbital resonances, especially with Saturn's moon Mimas, whose repeated gravitational influence helps keep that region less crowded, as though the moon were softly brushing the particles aside in a rhythm too slow and too graceful to ever disturb the peace. And this is one of the most relaxing facts about Saturn, that even its gaps are not accidents of chaos, but places of pattern, where gravity hums a deep and silent music, guiding particles into lanes and curves, teaching them where to gather and where to drift apart, so that the whole ring system becomes a kind of celestial lullaby. A natural design so vast that no human hand could trace it fully, and yet so orderly that the mind can rest inside it, knowing that even here, among cold stones and shards of ice, there is gentleness and law and balance, and Saturn itself, beneath those rings, is a giant made mostly of hydrogen and helium, without a solid surface you could stand on in the ordinary way. A planet of deep atmosphere, pale gold clouds, hidden storms, and immense pressure, rotating so quickly that it bulges at the equator, appearing slightly flattened, as if even its shape had softened into comfort. And though winds can race through its upper atmosphere, from our drifting, dreaming distance, the whole globe appears quiet, wrapped in muted creams and honeyed bands, a patient sphere turning beneath its own bright halo, while around it move more than 100 known moons and moonlets, from great Titan with its thick atmosphere to countless smaller companions, whose names are less famous, but no less lovely, tiny attendants circling through shadow and light. And among these small moons are some of the most enchanting figures in Saturn's neighborhood, because they do not merely orbit nearby, but interact with the rings themselves, with moonlets embedded in gaps and shepherd moons, helping maintain narrow ring edges, shaping structure by their gravity in ways both subtle and profound, so that places like the Encke Gap are influenced by the tiny moon pan, whose presence helps keep a path clear while creating waves in surrounding ring material, as if the moon were gliding through silk and leaving folds behind it. And elsewhere, Atlas and Daphnis perform their own delicate work, stirring the ring particles into ripples and scalloped forms, reminders that small bodies can leave graceful signatures across enormous systems, and the more you imagine it, the more peaceful it becomes. This vast realm where nothing happens quickly, where every change takes place through repetition, orbit after orbit, year after year, under the patient hand of gravity, until structure emerges from endless circling. And perhaps that is why Saturn feels so naturally suited to a calming bedtime story, because it invites the mind to stop chasing sharp thoughts and instead move in slow curves, returning again and again to the same beautiful forms, the same golden globe, the same shining rings, the same tiny moons keeping their ancient watch, until wakefulness itself begins to loosen and drift, and all that remains is the hush of space, the softness of distance, and the quiet promise that there are still 99 more relaxing Saturn facts waiting somewhere ahead in the dark, arriving one by one, as lightly as frost settling onto a silent window, now that Saturn has grown larger in the window of your drifting vessel. You may notice that its rings no longer seem like a single bright band, but a layered and delicate system of luminous paths, pale as brushed silver and faintly golden where the distant sunlight touches them. And as this gentle bedtime story continues, carrying you further into calm narration and further away from the busy edges of the day, you can let your thoughts float beside those rings and wander slowly through their graceful divisions. Because one of the most soothing truths about Saturn is that even its emptier spaces are meaningful, even its apparent silences are full of pattern. And among the most famous of these is the Cassini division, a broad dark gap that separates the brilliant B ring from the outer A ring, not a complete emptiness, but a region where fewer particles gather, where the brightness softens, and where gravity, moving patiently over ages beyond counting, has shaped a quieter lane in the circling ice. And perhaps there is something deeply restful in that idea, that space itself can be organized not by noise or hurry, but by repetition so steady and so calm that whole structures form in silence, one orbit at a time, one small pull after another, until a vast ring system learns its own slow geometry. And as you drift nearer in imagination, you may picture the countless particles that make the rings, pieces of water ice so reflective that they catch the faint sun and return it as a cool glow. Some tiny as dust, some as large as boulders, all moving together around Saturn in flat and patient streams, never rushed, never quite touching in the way a solid sheet might, but instead flowing as a congregation of separate pieces that together appear almost seamless from afar. And this too is a relaxing story hidden inside the science, because what looks smooth from a distance is often composed of countless small things cooperating quietly, just as a peaceful night is made from many breaths, many heartbeats, many gentle seconds gathered side by side. And beyond the Cassini division, there are more narrow gaps and ringlets, each with its own subtle character, each shaped by the measured influence of moons and resonances. And among them, the Encke gap appears as a fine opening in the A ring, a place where the small moon Pan moves like a careful shepherd, its gravity helping clear a path while also lifting faint waves along the ring edges, little corrugations in the icy material that seem almost like the folds left in fabric after a careful hand has passed across it. And farther along the Keeler gap holds the moon Daphnis, tiny and serene, whose gravity creates ripples in the surrounding ring particles, so elegant that they look like the breathing of the rings themselves, rising and falling in delicate ridges, as if Saturn's halo were softly sighing in its sleep. And in this nighttime story, with your body resting more heavily now, and your thoughts perhaps growing softer around the edges, you may imagine yourself gliding above those ring lanes very slowly, not close enough to disturb them, only near enough to see that their beauty comes from order, that tiny moons can guide enormous structures, that even a body only a few kilometers across can leave signatures in a disk that stretches across hundreds of thousands of kilometers, which is a tender sort of cosmic wisdom, the kind that belongs in a sleep story, because it reminds the mind that small, steady influences matter, and that peaceful things are often shaped not by force, but by persistence. And Saturn itself turns beneath this shining architecture with its quiet dignity, completing a rotation in just over 10 hours, so that its cloudy atmosphere spins rapidly, while the ring particles farther out keep their own slower periods depending on distance, each orbit obeying the deep arithmetic of gravity, with inner particles traveling faster than outer ones, which means the rings are always in motion, and yet always appear calm, a paradox so gentle that it feels almost made for deep sleep, because motion does not always mean disturbance, and change does not always mean unrest. And in the Saturnian system, everything seems to move in a way that preserves stillness rather than breaking it. And while the broad B ring glows dense and bright, and the ring stretches outward with quieter transparency, the faint C ring lies closer to the planet, like a soft inner veil, less brilliant, but no less beautiful, almost ghost-like against Saturn's pale cloud tops. And together these regions create a layered portrait of structure and light, a planetary lullaby written in arcs and shadows, where every division, every ringlet, every gap tells the story of balance, of particles meeting resonance and responding not with chaos, but with arrangement, as if the whole system were listening to an inaudible melody and settling itself into harmony. And somewhere in that harmony, your own thoughts may begin to loosen even further, because this relaxing story asks so little of you, only that you follow the curves, that you allow the names themselves to become soothing: Cassini, Enke, Keeler, Pan, Daphnis, Saturn, words drifting past like dim lights seen from a warm cabin window. And perhaps already the facts are starting to blend with dream, so that the science becomes atmosphere, the atmosphere becomes comfort, and the comfort becomes the gentle edge of sleep. While outside the vessel, the rings continue their endless circling, not cold in any harsh sense, but quiet and bright and impossibly patient, teaching the night how to be spacious, teaching the mind how to move more slowly, and teaching this bedtime story how to hold you softly and without effort in the golden hush of Saturn, as your quiet vessel drifts a little farther along Saturn's ring plane. Still wrapped in dim light and perfect stillness, you begin to notice that this beautiful system is not shaped only by the great planet below, or by the vast broad rings spread like luminous silk across the dark, but also by tiny companions, small moons with gentle names and delicate rolls, moving so faithfully through their orbits that they seem less like separate worlds and more like careful keepers of Saturn's sleeping halo. And in this soft sleep story, this bedtime story carried on calm narration and slow wonder, it is these little moons that now come forward one by one, not to disturb the peace, but to deepen it, because some of the most relaxing facts about Saturn are hidden in the way very small objects can guide very large patterns. How a moonlet no wider than a small city can influence lanes of ice stretching farther than continents, and how quiet repetition, given enough time, can create grace on a planetary scale. And perhaps the gentlest of these ideas is the notion of shepherd moons, tiny bodies that orbit near the edges of rings or within narrow gaps, using their gravity not with violence, but with patience, helping ring particles gather into sharper boundaries, or maintaining the delicate order of narrow bands. And among them, Prometheus and Pandora move near the F ring, one inside and one outside, like two quiet attendants walking beside a ribbon of frost, their combined gravitational nudges helping to shape that ring's braided and shifting appearance, which from a distance looks almost hand-woven, as though the ring had been stitched from moonlight and fine ice by motions too slow for any eye to follow in real time. And the F ring itself is one of Saturn's most dreamlike places, faint and narrow, and surprisingly active, with strands and clumps and fleeting features that change as particles gather and drift apart. Yet even there, the overall feeling remains serene, because every disturbance is part of a larger balance, every slight tug becoming another thread in the long fabric of orbit. And if you imagine floating above it now, you may see not a harsh collision of bodies, but a patient exchange of influence, a kind of celestial gardening performed without haste, where tiny moons prune and guide the edges of brightness and shadow. And deeper among the rings, Pan continues its quiet path within the Encke gap, a moon shaped rather unusually, with an equatorial ridge that makes it resemble a smooth dumpling or a small flying saucer sculpted by accumulation. And that shape itself feels fitting in this relaxing story, because Pan seems less like a conqueror and more like a little caretaker who has slowly gathered material around its middle while circling through the gap, keeping its lane open and raising subtle waves in the ring particles nearby, while Daphnis, still smaller and hidden within the Keeler gap, traces its own nearly invisible path and leaves behind graceful vertical ripples along the gap edges, especially where nearby particles are gently lifted by its pull, creating ridges that cast soft shadows when sunlight strikes them at a low angle, so that even the tiniest moon can write visible poetry into Saturn's rings. And as your breathing grows slower, it may be comforting to think of the whole ring system as a place where nothing is wasted, where every orbit matters, where size does not determine beauty, and where the smallest moons can leave the most delicate marks. Because Saturn's realm is filled not only with famous large worlds, but with moonlets, embedded bodies, and irregular fragments, each adding some slight contribution to the wider architecture. And together, they remind us that the solar system is not built only from giants, but also from humble companions, whose effects become visible only when one learns to look with patience, which is perhaps the truest mood of a gentle bedtime. To stop demanding spectacle and begin noticing quiet design. And here, in the golden hush beyond Earth, even scientific language begins to feel soothing. Resonance, orbit, ringlet, moonlet, shepherding, accretion. All of it softened by distance, all of it folded into the nighttime story, like warm blankets laid one over another. And below your vessel, Saturn turns steadily, its cloud bands muted and creamy, while above and around it, these small moons continue their ancient work, tracing circles so regular that time itself seems to relax in their presence, because an orbit is only falling made graceful, only motion made continuous, only gravity turned into rhythm. And rhythm is one of the oldest comforts the mind can know, and perhaps that is why Saturn feels so naturally bound to deep sleep, because everything here repeats without strain. The planet spins, the moons circle, the ring particles stream, the shadows move, and the same elegant laws return again and again, not to trap the universe in sameness, but to cradle it in predictability. And as you listen, or half listen now, with waking thought loosening like a ribbon untying in slow motion, you may picture Prometheus and Pandora keeping soft watch along the F ring, Pan gliding through its narrow corridor, Daphnis lifting ripples no louder than breath, and countless other tiny worlds passing unnoticed, except by those who take time to rest and observe. And in their company, the mind does not need to hurry toward the next thought, because the next thought is already moving in a circle somewhere ahead, already returning, already calm, just like the moons themselves. And so this relaxing story continues not by leaping forward, but by gliding, and the farther it glides, the quieter the night becomes, until Saturn's little keepers seem less like distant objects and more like sleepy guardians of order, tending the silver edge of the rings while you drift a little deeper, a little softer, and a little closer to sleep. Now, as this sleep story continues in its calm and unbroken drift, your quiet vessel moves to a place where Saturn's rings no longer seem only bright, because here they also become makers of shadow, and there is something especially soothing about that, something gentle and deeply fitting for a bedtime story, because the same vast arcs of ice that shine so softly in the distant sunlight can also lay long bands of darkness across the planet's upper clouds, like delicate curtains drawn over a golden lamp. And as you rest more fully inside this relaxing story, letting your body feel still and your thoughts feel slow and spacious, you may imagine yourself watching that immense shadow stretch over Saturn's pale atmosphere, not as a sign of absence, but as another kind of beauty, another expression of order, another reminder that in the Saturnian system, even darkness arrives gracefully, and below the rings, the planet turns with dignified patience, its broad cloud bands washed in muted creams, honey tones, and soft amber. And across those clouds, the ring shadows appear as gentle lines and curved veils, changing shape with the seasons of Saturn, because Saturn does have seasons, though they unfold very slowly during its long journey around the sun. And as the angle of sunlight changes over the years, the rings cast different patterns, sometimes broader and more dramatic, sometimes thinner and more restrained. And at special times, near Saturn's equinox, the sun shines almost exactly along the plane of the rings, making them appear extraordinarily thin from certain viewpoints, so thin that they seem to nearly vanish, like a silver breath fading into the dark. And perhaps this is one of the most calming facts of all, that something so wide can also be so slender, that a structure spanning an enormous distance can remain delicate enough to all, but disappear when seen edge on. And if you let that thought settle, it carries a quiet lesson of its own, that not everything immense must feel heavy, that greatness can be gentle, and that even in the vast reaches of space, there are forms that prefer grace to spectacle. And as your vessel glides on, you may notice the ring shadows lying not only across Saturn itself, but also moving subtly along the rings in return, because Saturn can cast its own shadow upon the ring system, creating a dark wedge where sunlight is blocked. And in that exchange of light and shadow, there's no conflict, only balance, as if planet and rings were sharing a slow conversation in a language made of angle, time, and orbit, each answering the other without hurry, each tracing shapes that only patience can fully appreciate. And somewhere near the brighter ring lanes, beyond the broad glow of the B ring and the more transparent reaches of the A ring. The narrow gaps remain like calm pathways through frost, and it is restful to remember that many of them endure because of resonance, because distant moons repeat the same soft gravitational influence again and again, until certain orbits become quieter places for particles to gather. And among these quiet sculptors, Mimas still plays its patient role in relation to the Cassini division, not by forceful command, but by repeated timing, by the steady return of gravitational rhythm, which is such a peaceful kind of power that it belongs naturally in a nighttime story, where everything important happens gradually, and nothing needs to be rushed, and all around, the ring particles continue their endless circling, each piece of ice reflecting just enough sunlight to turn the whole system into a luminous haze. And because those particles are mostly water ice, they are remarkably bright, giving Saturn the kind of radiance that feels cool rather than harsh. A silver gold glow that suits deep sleep better than any dazzling flare, while the tiniest moons continue their work almost invisibly, embedded in gaps, tracing the ring edges, shaping faint waves and ripples that become most visible when light falls at the right angle. And so even the shadows are not empty. Even the dimmer regions are full of structure, and even the quietest spaces contain form and meaning. And by now, perhaps, you can feel the rhythm of this gentle bedtime journey becoming slower still, because Saturn encourages a special kind of listening, one that is less about gathering facts quickly and more about letting them settle like fine dust in still air. And so the facts themselves begin to soften into atmosphere. The rings are wide, the rings are thin, the gaps are shaped by resonance, the shadows change with season, the tiny moons keep their courses, and Saturn turns beneath them all with patient beauty. And none of this asks anything difficult of you. None of it demands sharp attention, because this calming narration is meant only to carry you softly and steadily toward rest. And if you picture the scene now, with the great ring shadow laid across Saturn's clouds, and the far side of the rings fading into dimness, you may begin to sense that the whole planet is entering a quieter phase of the night along with you, as though the solar system itself had lowered its voice. And in that softened light, the rings become less like objects and more like thoughts, long pale thoughts curving around a dreaming world, while the little moons continue their subtle tending, and the narrow gaps remain open like silent roads through the ice. And everything about the view seems designed for a sleep story, for a gentle bedtime, for a relaxing story that helps you fall asleep, not by leaving the world behind entirely, but by showing you a version of the universe in which everything moves with kindness, everything glows without strain, and even the shadows know how to rest as your vessel continues its unhurried passage through Saturn's quiet dominion. The brighter rings now resting behind and below in long silver bands, your attention drifts outward towards something softer and more elusive, a ring so delicate that it seems less like a structure and more like a breath held in the cold dark. And this is a lovely place for a sleep story to go, because not all of Saturn's beauty is bright and sharply defined, and not all of its wonders announce themselves at once. For far beyond the dense inner rings there stretches the E-ring, broad and ghostly and faint, a vast and subtle halo whose particles are spread so thinly that it feels almost like mist in space. And as you imagine it now, pale and diffuse around the planet, you may sense how restful it is that such a large feature can be so gentle, so airy, so nearly invisible, as though Saturn were exhaling a quiet cloud of frost into the night and allowing it to drift there for ages without hurry, without noise, and without ever losing its serene form. And at the heart of this soft, ringed veil moves Enceladus, one of Saturn's most beloved moons, bright with ice and small enough to feel companionable rather than overwhelming, yet remarkable in a way that suits the calm wonder of a bedtime story. Because from fractures near its south pole, there rise plumes of water vapor and icy grains, fountains so fine and cold that some of their material escapes the moon and joins the E-ring itself, meaning that the ring is not merely a remnant left behind long ago, but something gently renewed, something quietly fed by an active moon, whose hidden ocean world sends particles upward into space like silver dust from a dream. And there is something deeply soothing in that image, that a moon can help make a ring, that a ring can be sustained by tiny drifting crystals, and that even here in the far solar system creation can take the form of a whisper rather than a shout. If you linger over that thought, breathing slowly now, letting the day loosen a little more, you may picture each microscopic grain rising from Enceladus, catching faint sunlight, and beginning a long curved journey around Saturn, joining countless others in a dim and spacious band that extends far beyond the boulder rings closer to the planet. And because these particles are so widely scattered, the E-ring feels unlike the dense icy architecture of the A and B rings, less like a polished corridor, and more like a soft snowfall suspended forever. A fine crystalline drift that belongs perfectly in a relaxing story, for it asks nothing of you except imagination. And perhaps even that begins to grow lighter now, as though your own thoughts were becoming ring particles too, spreading gently, separating from their daytime density, and floating into a wider, quieter arrangement around Enceladus. The silence feels almost sacred, not empty, but full of patient motion, because the moon keeps to its orbit while Saturn turns beneath, and the E-ring remains dispersed in elegant breadth, and nearby other moons continue their own slow passages, some larger, some smaller, some bright, some dark, each one part of a vast family that circles the planet with different rhythms, so that the whole Saturnian system seems less like a machine and more like a lullaby written in gravity, where every body has a place, every orbit has a tempo, and every return brings comfort rather than surprise. And in this nighttime story, that rhythm becomes a kind of cradle, rocking the mind away from sharp thought and toward the softer edge of sleep, where facts no longer feel like information to hold tightly, but like warm lights glowing one by one across a distant shore. And even the science here is tender when approached slowly, because the E-ring reminds us that Saturn's rings are not all made in the same way, not all equally dense, not all equally bright, and that some of the most beautiful patterns in the universe are maintained not by heaviness or pressure, but by continual, delicate replenishing, by one icy moon offering grain after grain to a surrounding halo, which is such a patient arrangement that it feels almost domestic in the best sense, as if Enceladus were quietly tending a lantern that never goes out, trimming its glow with invisible hands, while the rest of the solar system sleeps around it. And perhaps this is why Saturn so naturally belongs inside a gentle bedtime journey, because its grandeur is always softened by detail, and its detail is always softened by time. The farther you drift in imagination, the more the scene begins to blur into pure calm, the dim ring breathing outward, the tiny ice grains moving in enormous arcs, the moon below with its shining surface and hidden warmth, the black sky all around velvet deep and undisturbed, and somewhere in that stillness, you may feel your own body becoming heavier in the place where it rests, while your awareness grows lighter and more distant, as though it too were entering orbit, not lost, not afraid, simply held, simply carried, simply allowed to move in circles so slow and so safe that there is no need to resist them, and no need even to name every thought as it passes, because here in the soft outskirts of Saturn's ring world, naming is less important than drifting, and understanding is less urgent than peace. Perhaps that is one of the most relaxing facts of all, that the universe can sustain something so fine for so long, that a moon can cast frozen breath into space and build a ring from almost nothing, and that a structure so faint can still be real, still endure, still circle faithfully around a giant planet in the cold and beautiful dark. And as you listen to this calming narration, with your breathing easier now, and the edges of attention beginning to soften, you may let the E-ring become a symbol of quiet persistence, of all the gentle things that continue without demanding to be seen, of all the tender patterns that hold together because they are renewed a little at a time. And in that thought, there is rest, because sleep too arrives this way, not all at once, but in drifting layers, in scattered grains, in slow accumulation, until one moment you are still listening to Saturn, and the next you are simply floating with it through the dark, so your vessel does not hurry onward, and neither do you, because there is no need to race past this faint and lovely ring, this wide, cold veil fed by an icy moon, this soft outskirts music of Saturn's system. And for a little while longer you remain here, suspended between golden planet and distant stars, watching invisible crystals join an almost invisible circle, while Enceladus continues its ancient offering below, and the whole immense scene glows with the quiet reassurance that even the faintest things can shape the night, can beautify the dark, and can carry a tired mind very gently toward deep sleep. Your vessel now turns in a slow and almost dreamlike arc, leaving the faint, breathing softness of the E-ring behind, and gliding gently inward again, not with any sense of urgency, but with the same patient motion that has carried this sleep story from one serene corner of Saturn's realm to the next. And as the brighter rings gradually return to view, pale and luminous against the velvet dark, you may begin to sense that there is another kind of beauty waiting here. A beauty made not only of ice and light, but of timing, repetition, and the quiet mathematics that guide the heavens. Because one of the most calming facts about Saturn is that some of its loveliest spaces are shaped by resonance, by simple orbital relationships, repeating so steadily over long ages that the rings themselves seem to learn where to gather and where to leave room. And nowhere is that more peaceful to imagine than in the wide, dusky lane known as the Cassini division. That gentle separation between the bright B ring and the outer A ring, which from afar appears as a broad pause in Saturn's shining halo. A hush between brighter phrases, a still place in the middle of circling light. And as this bedtime story carries you nearer to it, you may picture that darkness not as emptiness, but as a calm interval shaped by the faithful pull of a small and rather endearing moon named Mimas. Mimas is not among Saturn's largest companions, and it does not need to be, because in this nighttime, story size is never the whole measure of importance, and there is something especially restful in knowing that such a small world can leave so large and graceful a signature upon the rings simply by keeping time, by returning again and again to its orbit with perfect patience, so that particles whose periods fall into a certain rhythm with Mimas receive repeated nudges, slight gravitational reminders that accumulate not all at once, but little by little, orbit by orbit, until the result is a quieter region where fewer particles remain densely gathered, and the mind can rest easily inside that idea, because it is not a story of force, but of consistency, not a tale of sudden disruption, but of a pattern so gentle and so persistent that even a ring system spanning immense distances responds to it with order as you continue drifting in this relaxing story, with Saturn below like a muted golden lantern, and the rings spread around it like brushed silver silk. You may imagine those icy fragments endlessly circling, some grains no larger than dust, some chunks far bigger, all moving according to distance and gravity, inner particles sweeping around more quickly, outer ones taking their time, each one part of a wide and flowing design, and among them, the repeated rhythm of Mimas is like a soft bell heard at long intervals in the dark, so far away and so regular that the rings do not resist it, but gradually arrange themselves around it. And perhaps that is why resonance feels so naturally suited to calming narration, because it teaches without speaking, shapes without pressing, and invites the listener to trust that repetition can be comforting, that what returns gently and predictably may guide us into stillness rather than disturbance. The Cassini division itself is not completely empty, and that too makes it beautiful in a subtle way, because it is not a stark cut or a harsh absence, but a region with finer ringlets and fewer particles, a quieter passage rather than a void. And that nuance matters in a gentle bedtime journey, because Saturn so often reminds us that peace is rarely absolute silence, and more often a soft reduction, a thinning, a breathing room between brighter things. And as you watch the division now, curving around the planet in broad, dark elegance, you may feel some inward echo spaciousness, as though your own thoughts were beginning to thin in the same way, leaving more room between one thought and the next, more room for rest, more room for sleep to arrive without needing to be chased. Nearby, the A ring glows with a more transparent brightness, while the B ring holds its dense, radiant calm. And between them, the Cassini division remains like a long exhale, one of Saturn's most graceful pauses, and around all of it, the ring particles continue their endless motion with no need for noise, no need for effort that can be felt from here. Only the old, steady obedience to gravity, which in this setting does not seem stern at all, but almost kind, almost parental, holding every moon and every grain in relationship, making space where space is needed and brightness where brightness belongs. And somewhere out ahead, Mimas keeps to its path, small and faithful, a rounded moon moving through the dark with a surface marked by ancient impacts. And though it circles far from the ring particles it helps influence, its role is no less tender for the distance. For that is another soothing truth the Saturnian system offers, that one body may shape another from afar. That relationship does not require closeness to be real, and that even across great stretches of space, a rhythm can still be shared, a pattern can still be maintained, a quiet lane can still be opened in the silver traffic of the rings. By now, perhaps, this sleep story has become slower in your mind than even the motion of the vessel, and the words resonance, division, orbit, Mimas, ringlet, and Saturn may pass through you with the softness of dim lights seen through half-closed eyes, no longer asking to be remembered sharply, only asking to be felt. And in that softened state, the science becomes almost like weather, a gentle atmosphere around you, a relaxing story made of intervals and returns, of faint shadows and luminous bands, of a tiny moon tapping out a pattern so patiently that an entire region of the rings answers back with quiet. And if you are already beginning to fall asleep, already drifting toward deep sleep, that is perfectly in keeping with Saturn's lesson here, because the universe does not always need brilliance to calm us. Sometimes it offers something better, a measured repetition, a little distance, a broad, dark lane between shining edges, and the reassurance that not every gap is a loss. For some gaps are invitations to rest, some divisions are forms of peace, and some of the loveliest structures in the night are made by leaving space for stillness to bloom. Now your quiet vessel drifts a little farther along the outer brightness of Saturn's A ring, and in this gentle sleep story, the view becomes finer, more delicate, more hushed, as though the great planet has invited you to lean closer, not with your body, but with your attention, until one narrow opening in the rings begins to emerge from the silver pattern like a seam in silk. And this is the Keeler Gap, a slim and graceful division near the outer edge of the A ring, where the tiny moon Daphnis keeps its patient course, so small against the immensity around it that it would be easy to miss at first, and yet so quietly influential that its presence can be read in the very shape of the ring itself. For as Daphnis moves through the gap, it stirs the particles at the edges and raises soft waves, faint ridges and ripples that travel through the icy material like breath passing through a curtain. And there is something profoundly restful in that image, because these are not violent swells or abrupt disturbances, only delicate undulations written into Saturn's halo by a moonlet faithfully returning to the same path again and again. In a bedtime story like this one, meant to help you fall asleep and settle toward deep sleep, such a fact feels less like astronomy and more like a lullaby in motion, because Daphnis does not command the rings with force. It simply keeps circling, and the rings respond with texture, with subtlety, with slow luminous folds that appear most clearly when sunlight brushes them at just the right angle. And as you imagine that light now, faint and slanting, touching the raised edges of the Keeler Gap, you may picture shadows lying gently along the ripples, so that the whole narrow lane looks almost embroidered, as if some unseen hand had stitched quiet patterns into Saturn's silver robe. The farther you drift into this relaxing story, the easier it becomes to feel that the universe has many ways of being tender. And one of them is this, allowing a moon barely large enough to seem significant beside a giant planet to leave visible signatures in a ring system of extraordinary scale. And perhaps that is one of the most calming truths Saturn offers, that in the vastness of space, small things still matter, soft influences still count, and the gentlest motions can shape beauty over time. So if your thoughts have been busy or crowded or bright with the long momentum of the day, you may let them take comfort here in the slow example of Daphnis, which never hurries, never strains, never tries to become larger than it is, but simply follows its orbit with such consistency that the rings themselves learn its rhythm around the gap. Countless particles of water ice continue their endless circling, some bright as powdered crystal, some larger and more shadowed, all moving in orderly streams around Saturn. And because inner particles travel faster than outer ones, the ring is never still in the strict sense. Yet, from your serene distance, it appears perfectly calm, which is another soothing paradox for this nighttime story. That motion can preserve peace, that many separate pieces can form a quiet whole, and that a system may remain beautiful, not because it is frozen, but because everything within it belongs to a pattern large enough to hold every movement without losing its grace. Below the rings, Saturn turns with its muted bands of cream and honey, a giant globe softened by distance, while above and beside it, the Keeler Gap remains a narrow, dark lane, edged by those lovely, wavering ridges. And if you listen inwardly as much as outwardly, you may sense that your own breathing has begun to resemble them, rising and falling, each breath a small ripple passing through stillness, each exhale widening the space inside you just a little more, until the facts themselves begin to float rather than press. And the words Keeler Gap, Daphnis, ring edge, sunlight, shadow, orbit become less like labels and more like soft lanterns arranged along a path through sleep. This is what calming narration can do when it moves slowly enough. It lets science become atmosphere, and atmosphere become rest, and rest become a kind of inner orbit where the mind no longer needs to leap from thought to thought, but can simply circle something beautiful until it grows quiet. And And Saturn offers many such beautiful things, but few are more delicate than this tiny moon, hidden inside a narrow gap, tracing its invisible route and lifting waves no louder than a whisper in fabric. And because this is a gentle bedtime journey, there is no need to measure anything too sharply now, no need to hold exact sizes or distances unless they soothe you. Only the broader comfort that the Keeler Gap is real, that dampness is there, that sunlight finds the ripples and makes them visible, and that somewhere in the cold reaches of the solar system, a moon so small most worlds would overlook it is nevertheless writing calm patterns into a ring of ice, which feels, in its own quiet way, like reassurance. So your vessel continues beside the A ring without haste, letting the view linger, letting the ripples return and return again. And perhaps by now, you are already drifting at the edge of sleep, where images grow softer and facts become dreamlike, where Saturn's rings seem made not of particles, but of pale thought, and where Daphnis, tiny and faithful, keeps moving through the dark, as if tending a passage no one needs to cross except the tired mind on its way to rest. And in that silver passage, under the hush of distant sunlight and the patient curve of Saturn below, this sleep story grows quieter still, carrying you gently onward, one soft wave at a time. Now the vessel glides away from the soft ripples of the Keeler Gap and follows the curve of Saturn's, a ring, toward another narrow passage, one a little broader in feeling, a little older in your imagination now, and just as suitable for this sleep story, because the Encke Gap does not appear as a wound or a break, but as a quiet lane, a resting place within brightness, a lantern path drawn through ice and shadow. And as you settle more deeply into this bedtime story, perhaps with your breathing slower and your body heavier against the place where it rests, you may imagine the gap opening before you like a calm corridor in a silver field, with Saturn below turning softly in honey and cream, and a tiny moon named Pan moving within that corridor with such patience that it seems born for a relaxing story, a nighttime story, a gentle bedtime voyage designed to help the mind loosen and drift toward deep sleep. Pan is one of those small Saturnian moons that feels almost impossibly delicate compared with the grandeur around it. And yet, its presence matters, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in the quiet way that repeated things matter, in the soothing way that a familiar rhythm matters. Because as Pan circles within the Encke Gap, it helps keep that lane clear, and nearby ring particles respond to its gravity with subtle patterns, with small waves and wakes that spread through the surrounding ice like folds through fine cloth. And if Daphnis seemed to whisper at the edge of the Keeler Gap, then Pan feels like a silent caretaker pacing a still hallway, ensuring that the path remains open, ensuring that the architecture of the rings continues its slow and graceful order. There is something especially comforting about Pan's shape as well, because it is not a smooth, simple sphere in the way a child might first imagine a moon, but a curious little body with an equatorial ridge, a form that makes it resemble a dumpling of ice, or a small rounded lantern wrapped with a belt of pale material. And in the hush of this calming narration, that shape seems less strange than tender, as though the moon had gently gathered some of Saturn's ring dust around its middle over long ages of circling, dressing itself in the very substance of the ring it helps shape, becoming in its own quiet way part moon and part memory of the ring, part traveler and part keeper as you continue to drift beside it in imagination. You may notice how restful the Encke gap feels compared with the surrounding brightness, because the A ring on either side glows with countless particles of water ice catching the distant sun, while the gap itself offers a darkened lane of breathing room, not empty in any absolute sense, but spacious enough to feel like a pause between thoughts. And perhaps that is why Saturn's gaps are so fitting for a sleep story, because they remind us that rest is not nothingness. Rest is arrangement. Rest is the creation of room. Rest is the soft interval that allows beauty to be noticed. Around Pan, the ring particles continue their endless motion, inner fragments moving faster, outer fragments more slowly, all of them held in the broad and patient grammar of gravity. And if that sounds mathematical, it is only mathematical in the gentlest way, because here mathematics becomes rhythm, rhythm becomes atmosphere, and atmosphere becomes peace, so that the mind does not need to solve anything at all. It only needs to listen, and listening itself grows drowsy, and drowsiness grows kind, and kindness grows wide enough to hold the whole ring system in one softened thought. It may help, as you fall asleep or begin to hover just at the edge of sleep, to picture the Encke gap not as a scientific feature to memorize, but as a moonlit corridor in a cosmic garden where Pan passes again and again under the same silent sky, leaving faint gravitational signatures in the icy borders. And each return is so measured, so faithful, that time seems to stretch and become velvety around it, until the difference between one orbit and the next feels less like change and more like breathing. Saturn itself, patient beneath all this, remains the great golden center of the view, slightly flattened by its rapid rotation, wrapped in pale bands and delicate shadow, while above it the rings spread in shining layers so thin and so wide that they still seem almost impossible. And yet, the more impossible they appear, the more soothing they become, because impossibility here is never frightening, only elegant, only quiet, only a reminder that the universe can be vast without being harsh. And somewhere in that quiet elegance, your own thoughts may now be widening into gaps of their own, little Encke gaps opening between one thought and the next, spaces where the day no longer presses so closely, spaces where the mind can rest like ring particles settling into a calmer orbit. And if any fragment of worry still moves within you, let it move slowly. Let it drift the way the icy grains drift, because Saturn does not demand stillness all at once. It teaches a softer lesson, that peace can be made from motion if the motion is gentle enough, and that even a tiny moon can create a passage through brightness where the tired mind may travel in comfort. So Pan continues on, small and steady, its unusual shape turned toward no audience, its work performed without display. And your vessel continues too, carried beside the silver corridor, neither approaching too fast nor turning away too soon, simply lingering long enough for the Encke gap to to become not just a place in Saturn's rings, but a feeling, a calm inner lane, a long exhale through which this bedtime story now passes, growing quieter as it goes, until the great ring seems like silk. The little moon seems like a floating lantern, and the whole of Saturn's ring world becomes a relaxing story told in curves, in pauses, in tiny, faithful returns, all of it guiding you very gently, very steadily, toward sleep. Now the vessel eases away from the lantern lane of the Inca Gap and enters a wider hush, where the rings still shine in patient arcs and Saturn still turns below like a dim golden hearth, but your attention is invited toward a different kind of quiet wonder, one that belongs not to a gap or a ripple alone, but to two small moons whose motion feels almost like a whispered secret of the solar system. Because in this sleep story, in this bedtime story carried on calm narration and soft scientific wonder, Janus and Epimetheus arrive not as dramatic travelers, but as companions moving in one of Saturn's most tender orbital dances. And as you let your breath grow slow and even, and allow the nighttime story to wrap around you like a warm blanket drawn carefully to the shoulders, you may imagine these two moons gliding through the dark near the outer rings, each following nearly the same path around Saturn, each keeping such close company with the other that from time to time they exchange places in the gentlest possible way, never colliding, never rushing, only approaching, adjusting, and drifting on, as though the universe had composed a duet so soft it could only be heard by a tired mind on the edge of sleep. Janus is the larger of the two, Epimetheus the smaller, and both are irregular little worlds, not polished like marbles, but shaped by long histories and quiet impacts, with surfaces that hold the pale memory of ancient time. And yet their most soothing feature is not how they look, but how they move, because as they orbit Saturn, they do something rare and elegant, each moon periodically trading orbital positions with the other, so that the inner one moves outward and the outer one moves inward, all through a slow gravitational conversation that unfolds with such perfect restraint that it feels almost ceremonial. And perhaps that is one of the most relaxing facts Saturn can offer, that two bodies can share space not by competing, but by yielding, not by forcing a passage, but by taking turns in silence. In most places, the mind expects crossing paths to bring friction, noise, or alarm, but not here, not in Saturn's serene dominion, because here even change is graceful, even adjustment becomes a form of harmony. And as this relaxing story continues, you may picture Janus and Epimetheus approaching one another in the dark, not closely enough to disturb the peace, only closely enough for gravity to pass between them like a soft understanding, after which each moon drifts into the orbit the other had held before. And all the while Saturn remains below, immense and calm, the rings spread around it like silver script written on black velvet. There is something deeply comforting in that exchange, because it is a reminder that order does not always mean rigidity, that stability can include movement, and that the cosmos sometimes preserves its peace, not by keeping everything fixed, but by allowing gentle rearrangement within a larger rhythm. And that is a beautiful lesson for a gentle bedtime, when thoughts may still be moving, feelings may still be settling, and sleep itself may be approaching not in one sudden wave, but in slow and kind adjustments, one layer of drowsiness exchanging places with another, until the whole inner sky becomes calm around these moons. The region near Saturn's outer rings feels broad and quiet, with narrow ringlets fading into darkness and tiny particles still circling in their ancient patterns, while the bigger ring structures behind you seem now like distant silver shores. And in that spaciousness, Janus and Epimetheus continue their shared routine with no need for witness or applause, just the old steady mathematics of gravity rendered into motion, so delicate that it seems almost affectionate, as if Saturn had entrusted these moons with a lesson in cooperation. And they had been repeating it for ages beneath the faint sunlight of the far solar system. The more you imagine them, the softer the scene becomes, because their dance is not fast, not bright, not demanding. And so it belongs beautifully in a sleep story, meant to help you fall asleep, meant to loosen the edges of thought and invite deep sleep without effort. And perhaps by now the names themselves have grown soothing. Janus, Epimetheus, Saturn, rings, orbit, exchange, return. Each one passing like a low chime through the dark, each one asking less of memory than of feeling, until the science becomes atmosphere once more, and the atmosphere becomes rest. You may notice, too, that this exchange of paths is rare enough to feel precious, but simple enough to feel natural. And that balance is part of what makes Saturn so endlessly calming, because it is a place where extraordinary things happen in quiet ways, where the rings can be thin as a thought and wide as a continent of light, where tiny moons can sculpt gaps or trade orbits, and where nothing seems eager to impress, everything content, instead to continue patiently, beautifully, in the dark, so the vessel lingers here a little longer, suspended near the outer ring region, where these small moons move through their gentle choreography. And your mind, if it is still awake, may begin to mirror them, letting one thought drift outward while another drifts in, letting concerns exchange places with softer things, until even your inner world feels more spacious and forgiving. And in that softness, the nighttime story keeps carrying you onward, not with sudden discoveries, but with the quiet assurance that the universe contains patterns of remarkable kindness, and that somewhere above Saturn's rings, two little moons are still taking turns in the dark, passing one another with perfect calm, teaching the night how to share, teaching the mind how to yield, and teaching this bedtime story how to move slowly and peacefully toward sleep. Now the vessel glides onward into one of Saturn's most delicate and dreamlike places, a region where the rings no longer seem like broad, polished bands alone, but like fine threads gathered into a ribbon so slender and so changeable that it almost resembles a strand of moonlit silk floating in the cold. And this is the F ring, narrow and elusive and endlessly gentle in its shifting beauty, a perfect place for this sleep story to linger, because the F ring does not ask to be understood quickly, and it does not reward hurry. Instead, it invites the slow gaze, the softened breath, the quiet mind that is ready to fall asleep while listening to a bedtime story made of subtle details and calm scientific wonder. And as you rest more deeply now, perhaps feeling your thoughts stretch farther apart like stars seen through mist, you may imagine the F ring extending ahead of you in a pale and braided line, not fixed in one simple shape, but touched by little strands, loops, clumps, and faint twists, as though the ring itself were gently weaving and unweaving in the dark, without ever losing its grace. One of the most relaxing facts about Saturn is that this narrow ring is shaped and guided by small shepherd moons, especially Prometheus and Pandora, which orbit near it like two quiet attendants walking on either side of a luminous garden path, their gravity softly influencing the particles of the ring, so that the F ring becomes a place of fine structure rather than plain uniformity. And there is something deeply soothing in imagining that two modest moons moving with patient regularity, not controlling the ring in any harsh sense, but tending it, encouraging patterns to emerge, allowing brightness and shadow to gather into little knots and braids that drift along the ring's edge like folds in ribbon. Prometheus, moving just inside the F ring, approaches the ring particles and gently draws out streamers and channels as it passes, while Pandora travels outside, helping define the outer boundary, and together they make the ring feel less like a static band and more like a living thread of orbiting frost. And even the word living here need not disturb the peace, because nothing is frantic, nothing is loud. Everything unfolds with that Saturnian patience you have come to know by now. Orbit after orbit, return after return, until structure appears through repetition, the way sleep appears through breathing, slowly, softly, and without force. If you picture the scene now, with Saturn glowing below in pale gold and cream, and the F ring stretched thin against the dark, you may notice how perfectly this place belongs in a relaxing story. For the ring seems almost handcrafted, and yet no hand has touched it. Only gravity, time, and the faithful passage of small moons, which is a comforting thought in itself, that beauty can arise from quiet laws, that elegance can come from patience alone, and that the universe often builds its most delicate things, not through grand gestures, but through tiny, repeated influences, almost too gentle to notice in any single moment. Somewhere along the F ring, particles cluster into brighter knots and then loosen again. And elsewhere, the ring seems split into strands before drawing back together. And all of this happens so gradually that it feels more like breathing fabric than changing matter, as though the ring were inhaling and exhaling in the darkness. And perhaps by now, your own breathing has begun to echo that same slow rhythm, each inhale gathering the silver threads a little closer, each exhale letting them drift apart again, until the science and the sensation become nearly the same thing. And this nighttime story no longer feels like information carried to the mind, but like calm carried through the body. The shepherd moons themselves are small, irregular, and humble beside the great planet they orbit. Yet their effects are unmistakably graceful. And that may be one of Saturn's kindest lessons, that small companions can shape wide beauty, that gentle influences can leave lasting signatures, and that even in a place as enormous as a planetary ring system, there is room for tenderness, for fine structure, for delicate order. And as you continue drifting in imagination beside this braided ribbon, you may feel that your thoughts no longer need to hold sharply to names or mechanisms. They only need to follow the feeling of the scene, the pale line of the F ring, the little moons keeping watch, the dark space around them soft as velvet, and the sense that everything here is moving exactly as it should. Far behind, the brighter main rings now seem calmer still, like distant shores of light, while here at the edge, the F ring offers a more intimate quiet, a finer texture of peace. And because it is narrow and intricate, it teaches the eye to soften, to notice without straining, to allow detail to arrive as a whisper. And that is very much the way sleep arrives too, not as a switch suddenly thrown, but as a careful dimming, a gentle braid of breath, heaviness, distance, and ease. So the vessel does not hurry past this place, and neither do you, because there is no need to move faster than the moons, no need to think louder than the ring, no need to be anywhere but here for a little longer, watching Prometheus draw subtle features from the ring's inner edge, watching Pandora keep quiet company beyond, and letting the whole fragile ribbon become part of the soft inner landscape, where waking slowly loosens its hold until Saturn's F ring seems less like an object in space and more like a silver thread being woven through the dark fabric of your thoughts, smoothing them, spacing them, calming them, and carrying this gentle bedtime story onward into an even deeper and more peaceful night. Now the vessel glides away from the braided hush of the F ring and turns its attention toward another small and tender keeper in Saturn's serene domain, a moon so modest and so softly shaped by its surroundings that it seems almost like a thought the rings themselves have dreamed into being. And this is Atlas, drifting near the outer edge of Saturn's A ring, where the bright ice of the great ring system thins into space, and the silence feels especially pure. And as this sleep story continues, slow and unbroken, you may imagine the scene before you as a pale border between brightness and darkness, between the silver abundance of circling particles and the deep velvet beyond. And somewhere along that border, Atlas moves in patient orbit, small and pale and untroubled, like a lantern pebble floating along the rim of a vast celestial lake. There is something wonderfully calming about Saturn's edge regions, because edges can sometimes feel sharp in ordinary life. But here, the edge is soft, almost feathery, a place where one form of beauty gently yields to another, and Atlas belongs to that mood completely. For it is a moon associated with the outermost parts of the A ring and the nearby ring environment, a quiet companion to the great system of ice. And as you listen to this bedtime story, allowing each phrase to lengthen like a slow breath in cold, clear air, you may picture Atlas not as an isolated rock, but as part of the ring world's wider calm, a small body whose shape, motion, and setting all seem to echo Saturn's larger lesson that even the tiniest presences can help define enormous beauty. Atlas has an unusual form, one that seems almost delicate in its own way, with a broad equatorial ridge that gives it a smooth, disc-like or dumpling-like appearance, and in the soft light of this nighttime story, that shape feels less peculiar than comforting, because it suggests a moon gently gathered at its middle by the same patient processes that shape the rings, as though fine material had settled around its waist over long ages, dressing it in a quiet band of its own. And perhaps that image is restful, because it softens the boundary between moon and ring, between object and environment, until everything here seems connected by slow accumulation and shared orbit around Atlas. The particles of the A ring continue their endless circling, each one following Saturn with a speed that depends on distance. Inner fragments moving a little faster, outer fragments a little more slowly, yet from the perspective of your drifting vessel, it all appears smooth and deeply composed, not unlike a river seen from very high above, where all the individual currents disappear into one broad glimmer. And that is one of the great comforts of Saturn. That complexity can become peace when viewed from a gentle enough distance, and that 1,000 motions can blend into one calm impression if you let yourself remain here a little longer, with no need to hurry to the next fact or the next image. Atlas begins to feel like a guardian of thresholds, a small moon accompanying the place where the bright order of the A ring gives way to the subtler outer regions. And in a relaxing story, this sort of threshold is especially soothing, because it resembles the threshold of sleep itself, that tender place where waking does not end abruptly, but simply thins, where thoughts become more spacious, where one mental ring of brightness gives way to another quieter region beyond. Saturn is full of such transitions, and Atlas reminds us that they can be beautiful, that crossing from one state to another need not be jarring, and that the universe often prefers slow curves to hard lines. Below, the planet's golden cloud bands continue their patient turning, faintly banded, softly shadowed, and slightly flattened by rapid rotation, while above and around them, the ring plane stretches outward in pale geometry, and near its edge Atlas keeps to its path without any need to announce itself, which may be why it fits so naturally inside calming narration, because it does not ask for admiration. It simply remains, circling, accompanying, quietly participating in the vast architecture of Saturn's ring realm. And perhaps by now, your own mind has grown quiet enough to recognize the comfort in such modesty. The comfort in a moon that does not dominate the sky, but still matters. The comfort in an outer edge that is not a cliff, but a fading. The comfort in a world where form is shaped by repetition rather than urgency. This gentle bedtime journey can hold those comforts for you as long as needed, because Atlas belongs to a system where time is deep, motion is graceful, and even the outermost boundaries are touched by softness. The more you imagine this little moon, the easier it becomes to feel your thoughts loosening from their daytime edges, becoming rounder, slower, less eager to define and divide, and instead content to drift beside the bright outer ring, watching Atlas pass in quiet profile against the dark, a small pale figure wearing its subtle ridge like a belt of frost. In that view, the whole Saturnian system seems to exhale, and the edge of the A ring becomes not merely a place in space, but a calm inner margin where the mind can rest between one thought and the next. So the vessel lingers here, neither moving away too soon nor pressing any closer than peace allows. And Atlas continues onward, as it always has, faithful to its narrow path, near the ring's bright boundary, while the ice behind it shines softly, and the darkness beyond it opens like a wide and welcoming room. And somewhere in that opening, with the silver edge beside you and Saturn glowing below, sleep may begin to feel very near indeed, not as something to reach for, but as something already surrounding you, like the stillness around Atlas, like the hush at the ring's outer rim, like the slow and gentle fading of light into rest from the quiet edge where Atlas kept its patient watch. Your vessel now eases inward again, gliding back toward the brighter heart of Saturn's rings. And as this sleep story continues in its slow and silken rhythm, there appears before you one of the most delicate and dreamlike mysteries in all the Saturnian system, something so faint and so fleeting that it seems less like structure and more like a passing thought laid across the rings. And these are the soft spokes, shadowy markings that can sometimes be seen stretching across parts of Saturn's ring like fine smoke drawn over polished ice. And in a gentle bedtime story, such as this one, they feel perfectly at home because they do not seem fixed or hard or insistent, but temporary, airy, and calm, as though Saturn itself were half dreaming and letting dim brushstrokes drift over its brightest silver band as you rest more deeply now, with your breathing perhaps so slow that it almost feels synchronized with the great turning of the planet below. You may imagine the ring not as a solid sheet, but as a dense and luminous gathering of countless icy particles, each one circling Saturn in patient obedience to gravity. And across that broad brightness, the spokes appear from time to time as dusky radial features, faint lines or wedges that seem to cut across the ring material rather than flow with it. And this has made them especially enchanting because they suggest that even in so well-ordered a system, there remain small, soft surprises, quiet atmospheric touches in a place made mostly of ice, motion, and light. There's something especially soothing about phenomena that do not remain forever, and the spokes belong to that category of cosmic tenderness because they come and go, seeming stronger in some seasons and weaker in others. And in the hush of this nighttime story, you do not need to hold tightly to every mechanism proposed for them, only to the feeling they create, the sense that Saturn's rings are not only architecture, but mood, not only particles, but passing veils. And perhaps that is why the mind can relax so easily here, because the rings do not ask to be reduced into something rigid. They allow mystery to remain soft around the edges. If you picture the view now, your vessel hovering in serene observation above the ring plane, Saturn's pale golden clouds turning below, and the ring spreading outward like a bright frozen sea. Then the spokes begin to resemble the shadows of distant feathers laid over frost, or the memory of wind moving over snow, except that there is no wind here in the ordinary earthly sense, only the deep and subtle interactions of particles, electric charge, sunlight, and Saturn's magnetic environment all of it unfolding so gently that the result seems less like an event and more like a hush in a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep. This is a beautiful kind of fact because it teaches that even science can have softness. Even explanation can leave room for wonder. And even the most measured observations of Saturn still preserve the feeling that the planet keeps a few lullabies to itself. Around the spokes, the ring particles continue their endless streaming motion, the countless icy fragments reflecting light with a cool brilliance that never feels harsh. And because the B ring is one of Saturn's brightest and densest ring regions, those faint, dusky markings seem all the more gentle by contrast, appearing and fading like thoughts that briefly cross the mind before dissolving again into quiet. Perhaps that is why this part of the journey feels so restful, because it mirrors the inward experience of nearing sleep, when impressions arise without needing to be grasped, when shapes form behind closed eyes and then drift away, when the mind becomes a wide, luminous field through which softer shadows pass without trouble. And here in Saturn's rings, the same kind of peace seems written into matter itself, with bright ice holding space for dim fleeting forms that ask for nothing more than to be noticed tenderly. Below it all, Saturn remains a calm and slightly flattened lantern of muted creams and golds, turning in dignified silence, while the great rings arch around it with their gaps, divisions, ripples, and moon-tended edges. And somewhere beyond the brighter structures, the tiny moons continue their ancient courses, shepherding, shaping, exchanging paths, or simply accompanying the ring world with steadfast presence. And that wider memory of the journey now makes the spokes feel even gentler, because they are not alone. They belong to the same family of quiet effects, the same universe in which small causes create graceful patterns, the same patient order in which even a temporary feature can become beautiful. The more you linger with the spokes, the less they seem like anomalies, and the more they seem like breath, as though Saturn's rings were exhaling dimness over their own brightness, and then slowly drawing clarity back in. And if your thoughts are beginning to blur now into something more spacious and dreamlike, then this is the perfect region to drift through, because nothing here insists on sharpness. Nothing demands effort. Everything invites soft attention and then gently releases it, so your vessel remains suspended above the bright B ring a little longer, and the spokes, whether visible or fading, continue to lend the ring a hushed and changing texture, reminding you that peace is not always perfect uniformity, that calm can include delicate variation, and that even in the most luminous places, there is room for passing shade. In that shade, there is comfort, and in that comfort, there is sleep. And as the silver ring glows beneath those faint drifting markings, this bedtime story grows quieter still, until the bright ice, the dusky spokes, the golden planet, and the black velvet beyond all begin to merge into one long, soothing impression, carrying you onward with no hurry at all, deeper into Saturn's inner light and deeper toward rest, as your quiet vessel lingers above Saturn's luminous inner rings, with the pale B ring still glowing like a frozen sea beneath a soft haze of shadow and light. This sleep story drifts toward one of the gentlest ideas in the Saturnian realm, a phenomenon so delicate that it feels less like falling and more like remembering, because some of the material from Saturn's rings does not remain forever in those bright circling bands, and instead, over very long stretches of time, tiny charged particles can be drawn inward along Saturn's magnetic pathways, slipping from the ring system toward the planet's upper atmosphere in what many have lovingly imagined as ring rain. A quiet descent of icy substance toward golden clouds, and in a bedtime story, in a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep and float toward deep sleep, there is something deeply calming about that image, because it suggests that even Saturn's grandest structures are not rigid or separate, but gently connected, with ring and planet linked by invisible lines of influence, by slow exchanges too subtle to disturb the peace. You may picture it now as a kind of celestial drizzle, though not rain in the familiar earthly sense, not drops striking rooftops or windows, but a finer and far more silent motion, tiny particles and watery traces moving inward through the dark, guided by fields that cannot be seen until they become part of Saturn's upper atmosphere. And perhaps that is why the idea feels so soothing, because it is not sudden, not dramatic, only gradual, only patient, only another example of how Saturn seems to prefer long, soft transitions over abrupt endings. The rings above remain broad and beautiful, their countless icy pieces still circling in silver order. And yet, some portion of that brilliance is always part of a slower inward journey, as though the ring system were gently exhaling itself toward the planet it embraces, offering a little of its brightness back to the golden globe below. And if you listen inwardly as much as outwardly now, you may notice how naturally that mirrors the feeling of sleep itself, because sleep also comes by slow surrender, by little softenings, by a gradual letting go of brightness into dimness, thought into stillness, wakefulness into rest. Below the rings, Saturn's atmosphere stretches in broad pale bands of cream, honey, and muted amber, a soft, giant lantern turning in silence. And somewhere in those upper layers, the faint gifts of ring rain are received without sound, without splash, without any need to announce their arrival. And this too is one of Saturn's quiet lessons, that even grand exchange can happen gently, that even loss can look like grace when it unfolds slowly enough, and that beauty does not vanish when it changes form. It simply moves from one expression to another, from ring to atmosphere, from ice to cloudward trace, from brightness above to softness below. As this nighttime story continues, you may let that thought settle around you like a blanket. The thought that nothing here is hurried, that even the smallest particles are carried by patient laws, and that Saturn itself seems content to let time do the shaping, because time in this distant kingdom is not sharp or pressing, but wide and velvety. And every process, whether the clearing of a gap, the tending of a ring edge, the weaving of the F ring, or the inward drift of ring rain, unfolds with a calm that asks nothing more of you than your presence. If your body feels heavier now, or your mind more distant, that is perfectly in keeping with the scene, because Saturn invites a special kind of tiredness, not the strained tiredness of the day, but the softened tiredness that comes just before deep sleep, when thoughts begin to separate into slower streams and memory itself turns luminous and diffuse. And here, among the rings, that feeling becomes visible because the great bright arcs continue overhead while their faintest material drifts downward in silence, as though the planet were gathering its own moonlight back to itself. Perhaps there is comfort too in knowing that the Saturnian system is full of these invisible relationships, with gravity shaping particles, moons shepherding ring edges, shadows crossing cloud bands, and magnetic forces guiding tiny matter inward, all of it connected, all of it part of one serene design. And the more you imagine that design, the less alone any part of it seems, because nothing here circles in isolation. Everything belongs to everything else in some quiet way, and that belonging can feel deeply restful when carried into a gentle bedtime journey. The rings are not separate from Saturn. The moons are not separate from the rings. The darkness is not separate from the light. And perhaps your waking thoughts are no longer separate from dream either, because they too may be beginning to drift inward, to settle, to descend softly through unseen pathways toward a calmer state where no effort is required. Your vessel remains suspended in perfect stillness. And from this peaceful height, the whole scene looks less like astronomy and more like a lullaby written across black velvet. The silver rings above, the golden atmosphere below, and between them, the faint inward passage of icy particles, nearly invisible, endlessly patient, and beautifully sure. So this sleep story does not rush onward, and neither do you, because there is no need to move faster than Saturn's quiet exchanges, no need to think more sharply than the ring rain falls, only the invitation to drift with it, to let each sentence descend as softly as those hidden particles, to let each breath become part of the same slow surrender, until the bright ring world overhead and the warm muted planet beneath begin to blur into one long, soothing impression. And in that impression, there is calm narration, gentle bedtime comfort, sleepy science wonder, and the peaceful sense that even the most distant world knows how to release its light slowly into rest. Now the vessel drifts a little farther inward, leaving behind the gentle thought of ring rain, and entering a quieter, dimmer region of Saturn's ring world, where brightness becomes more transparent, and the whole scene seems wrapped in a softer hush. And this is where the sea ring offers its pale and tender presence, less radiant than the grander rings beyond it, less dense, less commanding, and therefore, perhaps, even more suited to a sleep story. Because not all beauty needs to shine boldly in order to soothe, and not all wonders need to stand at the center of attention to bring peace. And as this bedtime story continues in its slow and calming narration, you may imagine the sea ring as a veil of faint silver dust laid delicately before Saturn's cloud tops, almost ghost-like in places, a whisper of structure rather than a declaration, a ring that seems content simply to be near the planet, close enough to share in its soft, reflected glow, close enough to blur the boundary between world and halo. There is something deeply restful about thinness in the Saturnian system, because these immense structures, so wide in space, can feel so weightless in the mind. And the sea ring carries that feeling beautifully, made of countless icy particles, spread more sparsely than those of the brighter B ring, allowing more darkness and more Saturn light to pass through, so that as you gaze upon it in imagination, it seems almost like a curtain of frost suspended over a golden lamp. And perhaps that is why it belongs so naturally in a relaxing story, because it does not crowd the senses, it does not ask for sharp focus. It simply offers a softer layer through which the eye may drift, and through which the tired mind may settle. Below it, Saturn turns with its usual dignity, all pale creams and muted honey tones, cloud bands broad and serene, the whole planet seeming less like a giant of gas and pressure, and more like a warm lantern floating beneath a thin silver veil. And in this part of the journey, the closeness between ring and planet becomes especially calming, because the sea ring does not feel separate from Saturn in the way the farther rings sometimes do, but intimately connected, almost like a breath just above the cloud tops, a final luminous hush before atmosphere deepens and the golden world fully takes over as your own thoughts continue to slow, perhaps growing farther apart and less distinct. You may find comfort in the subtle architecture here, in the knowledge that even Saturn's fainter rings have texture and pattern, faint ringlets and delicate variations, places where particles gather a little more closely, and places where they remain more widely spaced, all of it arranged by the same patient laws that shape the brighter rings and shepherd the tiny moons, and all of it moving so steadily that the distinction between motion and stillness begins to soften until the sea ring seems almost unmoving, a permanent hush held in orbit. This is one of Saturn's quiet gifts, that it teaches the eye to appreciate what is gentle and almost hidden. And in doing so, it teaches the mind to rest in subtler forms of beauty, not only the bright edge, not only the dramatic gap, but also the thin veil, the quiet margin, the place where matter barely announces itself, and yet remains exquisitely present somewhere beyond. The familiar larger ring regions still circle in their ancient rhythms, and the tiny moons continue their patient work, shaping gaps, tending edges, tracing ripples through ice. But here in the sea ring, their distant influence feels muted and softened, as though all the sharper details of Saturn's ring system had been wrapped in gauze and laid down to rest. And that may be why this region feels so perfectly matched to deep sleep, because it is no longer asking the mind to follow structure too precisely, only to accept the atmosphere of nearness, transparency, and quiet repetition. If you imagine yourself looking through the sea ring now, toward the softly glowing planet beneath, you may notice how the ring seems to dissolve and reappear, how the eye can never quite hold it as firmly as it can hold the brighter bands farther out. And this too feels like the threshold of dreaming, when thoughts become translucent, when memories pass across awareness like faint ringlets over a golden sky, when nothing quite vanishes and nothing remains completely solid either. In that state, Saturn becomes less an object of study and more a place of rest, a world of gentle layers, where rings can be broad or braided, bright or pale, dense or whisper thin, and every one of them offers some version of the same cosmic kindness, the invitation to move more slowly, to notice more softly, and to let beauty unfold without effort. So your vessel lingers here above the sea ring, neither descending nor turning away, just resting in the company of this quiet veil, while Saturn glows below it with steady warmth, and perhaps your own mind is beginning to mirror that arrangement now. A calm planet of drowsiness beneath a thin ring of fading thought, each one turning under the other in peaceful balance until even the remaining edges of wakefulness grow transparent, and the whole scene becomes one long exhale of silver and gold. One more gentle chapter in this nighttime story, one more soft passage through Saturn's rings, and one more slow step toward the deep and dreamless comfort of sleep. Now the vessel drifts even closer to Saturn, passing inward from the pale veil of the sea ring toward a region so faint and so near the planet that it almost seems like the last soft thought before the golden atmosphere begins. And this is the D ring, Saturn's innermost main ring, a delicate and lightly scattered realm where the icy material is thin, shadowy, and subtle, and where this sleep story can grow quieter than ever because the D ring does not shine with the broad radiance of the B ring or the elegant contrast of the Cassini division, but instead offers a more secret kind of beauty, the beauty of something nearly transparent, nearly hidden, nearly dissolved into the warm glow below. And as this bedtime story continues in its calm narration, meant to help you fall asleep and sink toward deep sleep, you may imagine the D ring as a soft breath of frost suspended just above Saturn's upper clouds, a hush of faint particles circling in the dark, so close to the planet that the distinction between ring and atmosphere begins to feel dreamlike, as though one were slowly becoming the other without hurry and without sound. There is something profoundly restful about Saturn's faintest structures, because they ask the eye to soften and the mind to stop insisting on sharpness. And the D ring is perhaps the finest example of that gentle lesson, a place where the particles are more diffuse, the glow more modest, and the whole seen more inward than anything you have visited so far, as if the journey through Saturn's ring world has gradually brought you from bright outer silver to this quiet interior whisper. And now, hovering here in imagination, you may feel the same inwardness within yourself, the way wakeful thoughts begin to lose their hard edges, the way memory becomes lighter, the way the mind settles into layers instead of lines. Below, Saturn turns in broad bands of honey, cream, and muted gold. And because the D ring is so faint, the planet's own reflected light seems to rise through it in a particularly tender way, as if the ring were a fine translucent veil laid over a lantern. And that image belongs beautifully in a relaxing story, because it holds both distance and warmth, both space and shelter, both the cold clarity of orbiting ice and the soft reassurance of steady glow. Somewhere within this quiet region, faint ringlets and subtle variations still exist, because Saturn rarely makes anything entirely plain. And even here, there are patterns within the thinness, small concentrations of particles, gentle structures that form and fade, and traces of motion so continuous that they begin to feel more like texture than event. And perhaps by now, that is all the story needs to be as well. Not a sequence of events, but a texture, a long, calm texture of words and breath and drifting light, carrying you onward without asking you to hold onto anything too tightly. The D ring lies so close to Saturn that it feels intimate, almost companionable, as though this were the place where the planet's immense gravity and the ring system's delicate architecture meet in their softest conversation. And in that conversation, there is no urgency, only the old and patient language of orbit, repetition, and slow change. And if you listen with the kind of attention that belongs to late night, when the body is heavy and the mind has become spacious, you may feel that the D ring is not merely circling Saturn, but soothing it, tracing a last thin circle of silver near its skin, like a whispered lullaby, repeated over and over in the dark. It is comforting, too, to remember how varied Saturn's rings have been on this journey, how some were bright and broad, some narrow and braided, some shaped by tiny shepherd moons, some marked by gaps and ripples, some renewed by icy plumes, and now this one, the innermost whisper, scarcely announcing itself at all. And together they form a kind of gentle encyclopedia of calm. 100 relaxing facts, not as a list, but as a landscape where each ring and moon contributes its own quiet note. And the D ring's note is among the softest, almost too soft to hear, yet all the more fitting for a nighttime story meant to carry a tired listener into sleep. If any part of you is still awake enough to imagine details, you may picture the ring particles here as fine grains of pale dust and ice moving in unending circles above Saturn's cloud tops, each one catching just enough light to exist in the eye for a moment before fading back into the overall hush. And if imagining details now feels like too much, that is perfectly all right too, because the D ring welcomes blur, welcomes softness, welcomes half-seen things, and perhaps that is why it feels so close to dreaming, because dreams also allow forms to remain incomplete, luminous, and kind. Your vessel does not move quickly here, and neither does the story, for this is the innermost region of the ring journey, a place that invites lingering, a place where the difference between looking and resting becomes very small, and somewhere in that smallness, you may feel the final traces of the day loosening away from you, not lost, only drifting farther out, like brighter rings receding into the distance, while you remain near the planet's warm glow. Saturn below continues its silent turning, immense and patient, and the D ring above it continues its faint circling, light as breath, thin as memory, close as a whispered thought, and together they hold this final quiet scene in perfect balance, so that the whole of the Saturnian world seems to pause, not completely still, but still enough for sleep, still enough for calm, still enough for you to rest inside it without effort, while this gentle bedtime story lowers its voice even more and lets the innermost whisper of Saturn carry you softly through the last bright threshold and into the deep, peaceful dark. Now, from the innermost hush, where the D ring circled like a whispered thought above Saturn's softly glowing atmosphere, your vessel begins the gentlest rise outward once more, not quickly, not with any feeling of departure, but with the calm, floating ease that has carried this sleep story through every silver band and shadowed lane of the planet's great ring world. And as this bedtime story continues, slow and unbroken, you may imagine yourself passing back through the pale ring light toward a region where some of Saturn's tiniest hidden companions leave marks so delicate that they seem almost like signatures in frost, because not every small moon is large enough to open a clean dark gap like Pan or Daphnis, and some remain tucked within the ring material itself, too small to fully clear a path, and yet still able to disturb the surrounding particles in ways that create beautiful little shapes, sometimes called propellers. And in a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep, that is a wonderfully soothing image, little unseen moonlets turning quietly within the A-ring, their presence revealed not by brightness or spectacle, but by soft, paired disturbances in the ice, as though tiny invisible boats were gliding beneath a silver sea and lifting gentle wakes to either side. There is something very comforting about the idea that a hidden object can still be known by the tenderness of the pattern it leaves behind. And Saturn offers this lesson again and again, because throughout its ring system, the smallest bodies often speak through structure rather than appearance, through ripples, edges, gaps, waves, and here, in these propeller forms, through local swirls of brightness and dimness that spread around embedded moonlets like folded silk. And perhaps that is why this part of the nighttime story feels so dreamy, because it asks you to sense what cannot easily be seen, to trust that tiny worlds are there, faithfully orbiting in the ring plane, shaping matter one soft encounter at a time, even when the eye does not hold them clearly. If you picture the view now, the A ring once again stretched outward in pale silver bands, Saturn below like a muted lantern of cream and honey, and your vessel suspended in perfect stillness above the ring plane. You may imagine these propeller features as faint winged shapes written into the circling particles, each one made by the gravity of a moonlet gently nudging nearby material inward and outward, disturbing the smooth flow just enough to leave a subtle pattern. And this is one of the most relaxing facts about sleepy science. That motion can reveal itself as design, that even the smallest body can turn surrounding matter into a kind of artwork, and that the ring system of Saturn is so sensitive, so responsive, and so patient that it records the presence of tiny companions, the way still water records the passing of a leaf as your breathing grows slower, and the calm narration settles more softly around you. Perhaps these little propellers begin to feel less like scientific curiosities and more like lullaby shapes, quiet marks of companionship in the dark, because each one tells the same reassuring story, that nothing here moves alone, that every orbit touches another orbit somehow, and that even the finest grains of ice are part of a wider harmony in which moons, moonlets, gaps, and rings all answer one another with grace, far from Earth, far from clocks and noise and crowded thought. Saturn's ring world continues its ancient patient weaving, and the propeller moonlets belong beautifully to that woven calm, for they do not interrupt the peace, they refine it, adding texture where there might otherwise seem to be only smoothness, adding gentle variation where the mind most needs something soft to follow as it drifts toward deep sleep. You may notice that the longer you remain here in imagination, the more the idea of hidden moonlets becomes almost intimate, as though Saturn were sharing a secret in a very low voice, saying that not all important things must be large, that not all beauty must be obvious, and that some of the loveliest structures in the universe appear only when we are quiet enough to notice faint differences in brightness, slight disturbances in flow, the almost invisible handwriting of gravity. And because this is a gentle bedtime journey, there is no need to hold the details too tightly now. No need to memorize where every little propeller lies, only to rest with the feeling of them, these tiny buried worlds circling within the ring, like seeds inside a silver field, each one lifting a delicate pair of wakes, each one proving that Saturn's great halo is not a flat sheet of sameness, but a living tapestry of innumerable interactions, all of them slow, all of them orderly, all of them softened by distance into pure calm. Below, Saturn continues its dignified turning, and above, the ring particles continue their endless shining, some bright as powdered frost, some dimmer in shadow, and among them, the propeller moonlets carry on their silent work without witness and without strain, shaping their little winged patterns orbit after orbit, until time itself begins to feel wide and circular, and perhaps your own thoughts are now circling that way too, no longer moving in straight, worried lines, but opening into gentle curves, small spaces, soft returns, and in that state, it becomes easy to imagine that your mind is another quiet ring, your breath another patient moon, your drifting drowsiness another small gravity, making tender patterns in the silver field of night. So the vessel remains here a little longer above the hidden propellers of Saturn, and the story does not hurry onward, because this is a place for lingering, for half-seen details, for the deep comfort of knowing that even in the vast cold reaches of space, the tiniest companions can leave the sweetest traces. And as those traces spread like faint wings through the ring, the whole scene grows stiller, softer, and more dreamlike, until Saturn's silver sleep seems to extend around you completely, holding you in its quiet geometry and carrying you very gently toward rest. Now the vessel drifts outward once more from the silver field of hidden propellers, rising through Saturn's quiet ring world toward a gentler and even fainter kind of structure, one that seems less like a ring and more like a partial memory of a ring, a soft, unfinished curve held in place by patience. And as this sleep story continues in its slow and calming narration, you may imagine the darkness ahead becoming finer, more powdery, more spacious, until within it there appear delicate dusty arcs associated with tiny moons such as Methane and Anth, small companions so modest that they seem almost shy beside the grander names of Saturn's family, and yet so quietly beautiful that they belong perfectly in a bedtime story, because these little moons remind us that the Saturnian system is not made only of broad shining bands and famous gaps, but also of subtle traces of light dust lingering along an orbit of matter gathered just enough to suggest a path without ever insisting on it. Methane is a tiny moon, soft in reputation and gentle in presence. And Anth is another little companion moving through Saturn's spacious realm. And around such small bodies, there can exist faint arcs of dust, tenuous concentrations of material that share their orbital neighborhoods. And perhaps that is one of the most relaxing facts in all of sleepy science, that even the smallest moons may carry with them a kind of haloed path, not a complete ring wrapping all the way around Saturn, but a partial curve, a lingering sweep of fine particles, as though the moon were moving through darkness with a very light brush and leaving behind the palest stroke of silver. If you imagine the view now, with Saturn far below as a warm and distant lantern, the bright main rings quieter and farther behind, and the outer reaches opening into broader velvet space, then these arcs feel almost like breath, made visible, dusty crescents, so faint that the eye must soften to find them. And in a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep, that softness is exactly the point, because not everything in this universe needs to be bright to be beautiful, and not everything must be complete to be calming. Some structures are lovely because they are partial, because they suggest more than they declare, because they drift at the edge of perception, the way dreams drift at the edge of thought. The material in such arcs is thought to come from tiny grains lifted from these little moons, dust freed gently over time, and then guided into shared paths by the same patient gravitational relationships that shape so much of Saturn's kingdom. And the more you consider that, the more peaceful it becomes, because once again, Saturn offers beauty through repetition and delicacy rather than force, through small impacts, slow release, and long orbital companionship, until an almost invisible arc forms and remains suspended in the dark, like a smile too faint to fully fade. Somewhere nearby, another small moon, such as Pallene, keeps to its quiet route as well, accompanied by an even subtler dusty environment. And together these tiny worlds make the outer Saturnian system feel less empty than it first appears, more like a wide, quiet garden in which every stone has left a little trace in the air around it. In this nighttime story, where your breathing may now be slower than the pace of ordinary thought, these arcs become wonderfully easy to love, because they ask for no strain, no sharp memorizing, only the simple comfort of knowing that in Saturn's realm, even dust can become graceful. Even a scattered cloud can become a pattern, and even the orbit of a very small moon can gather enough fine light to make a path worth following with the imagination. As the vessel lingers here, you may begin to sense how different kinds of ring beauty live together around Saturn. The dense inner rings with their glowing architecture, the narrow gaps with their tiny keepers, the braided F ring with its thread-like elegance, the faint E ring breathed out by Enceladus, and now these delicate arcs, partial and airy, like little verses added in the margins of a much larger poem. And perhaps that variety itself is soothing, because it mirrors the way sleep comes in layers, not only by one road, but by many gentle approaches, some bright, some dim, some close, some far, all of them leading inward toward the same quiet destination. Methane and Anth so small and so easily overlooked, teach one of Saturn's kindest lessons: that the universe keeps room for the nearly invisible, that there is dignity in faintness, and that a thing does not need to dominate the sky to shape it. If your thoughts are still awake enough to picture detail, then you may imagine those arcs as soft dust ribbons bending along the moon's paths, their particles slowly circling, never hurrying, never crowding, each tiny grain reflecting only the gentlest portion of the distant sun. If your thoughts have already grown blurrier, that is beautiful too, because these arcs belong especially to the blurred and half-dreaming mind, to the inward gaze that no longer separates every fact from every feeling. But let science become atmosphere, and atmosphere become rest. Saturn below remains patient and golden. The stars beyond remain quiet and still, and these tiny moons continue their ancient drifting with their pale dust companions, leaving the softest signatures in space, so the vessel does not move on too quickly, and neither do you, because there is no need to rush past a beauty so faint that it can only be appreciated slowly. And as this gentle bedtime story settles around you, the arcs of methane and anth become like dim silver commas in the long sentence of Saturn, pauses of dust and orbit and calm. And in those pauses, there is a special peace, the peace of things that endure without announcement, the peace of fine grains suspended in obedience to gravity, the peace of a universe large enough to cradle both brilliance and whisper-light traces, until at last the outer dark, the tiny moons and their faint, unfinished curves seem to merge into one wide, soft hush, carrying you farther into stillness, farther into comfort, and very gently toward deep sleep. And now, as this sleep story reaches its quietest shore, your vessel no longer needs to travel anywhere new, because Saturn has already given you so many gentle things to carry into rest: the bright rings and the pale rings, the narrow gaps and the hidden propellers, the shepherd moons and the dust arcs, the soft shadows on golden clouds, and the almost invisible silver veils near the planet's skin. And so this last chapter becomes not a new discovery, but a slow and tender gathering of everything you have seen, everything you have felt, and everything you no longer need to hold too tightly. Because this bedtime story, this nighttime story, this relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep and drift into deep sleep, is now becoming simpler, quieter, softer with every breath. And as you imagine Saturn before you one last time, floating immense and calm in the velvet dark, ringed with frostlight, and attended by tiny moons that move in patient silence, you may feel that the whole planet is no longer something far away at all, but something gentle and steady within the mind, a peaceful shape to rest beside, a golden lantern wrapped in silver sleep. The rings are still there, of course, spreading wide in impossible delicacy, thin beyond belief, and yet broad enough to seem like continents of moonlight laid across space, and within them remain all the quiet patterns that have carried you through the night. The Cassini division, like a long exhale between brightness, the Encke gap, like a calm lane through silver, the Keeler gap, with its soft ripples raised by tiny daphnes, the F ring braided and tended by its small guardians, the faint E ring breathing outward from Enceladus, the pale C ring, and the innermost whisper of the D ring, all of them still circling, still glimmering, still moving so steadily that motion itself has become peace. And now, as your thoughts grow more distant and your body grows heavier in rest, you do not need to remember every name or every detail, because the names have already done their work, and the details have already softened into atmosphere, into calming narration, into a gentle bedtime, feeling as light as ring dust drifting in the dark. Somewhere out there, Pan continues its patient orbit. Atlas keeps near the bright edge. Janus and Epimetheus trade their places with quiet courtesy. Methane and Anth carry their faint dust arcs through the outer hush, and hidden moonlets keep riding propeller marks into the silver field. But none of them need your full attention now, because the universe around Saturn knows how to continue without being watched. And there is deep comfort in that, the comfort of a world that remains orderly and beautiful even when you close your eyes, the comfort of knowing that the rings will keep circling, the moons will keep returning, the light will keep lying softly across the clouds, and nothing at all is asking you to stay awake for it. If any thought still lingers, let it float slowly like an icy particle in the rings, turning once in the dim sunlight and then drifting into the wider hush. If any feeling remains, let it settle like pale dust into a calm orbit of its own. If any part of the day still clings to you, let Saturn take it gently into distance, farther out beyond the silver lanes, farther out beyond the tiny moons, farther out into the quiet, where all sharp edges become soft. This is the slow fading outro now, the part where the story lowers its voice until it is almost only breath, almost only rhythm, almost only the sensation of being carried, because sleep does not need to be summoned anymore. It only needs space. And Saturn has made so much space for you tonight. Space in the gaps, space in the shadows, space in the pale, transparent rings, space between one thought and the next, until the whole great ringed planet has become a lesson in how to rest, how to move without strain, how to glow without effort, how to hold structure and softness at the same time. Perhaps now Saturn seems farther away again, not because you are leaving it, but because it is becoming part of dream, and in dream distance is kind, blurred, and beautifully weightless. The rings fade to silver threads, the gaps fade to quiet lanes of dark, the tiny moons fade to little pearls of stillness. The golden clouds fade to a soft, warm glow, and the glow fades too, becoming dimmer, gentler, more velvety, until all that remains is the feeling of circling slowly in complete safety, wrapped in night, wrapped in calm, wrapped in the long, easy rhythm of a sleepy science story that asks nothing more of you now, nothing to picture clearly, nothing to follow, nothing to finish, only this last soft circle around Saturn, this last silver hush, this last tender drift through rings, gaps, and tiny moons, and then deeper still into comfort, deeper still into quiet, deeper still into sleep, where the ring world continues without sound and without end. And you, at last, do not need to travel anymore, because you are already exactly where rest can find you, already where the story becomes silence, already where the night becomes gentle, already where the dark feels warm, safe, and endlessly serene.